request.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one is from the National Library of Medicine, dated February 2017. On average, 2 NCAA football players die per season.
Without objection, gentleman from Kansas is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to my colleague from South Carolina, Mr. Fry.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. What's interesting to me in this whole debate is this is the disconnect from Washington, D.C. with the rest of the world, right? That we're talking about a federalization on the other side of college athletes with commissions and regs and all this stuff. That is the disconnect, right? When you cross the Potomac, somehow these things crop up. Last week in the Energy and Commerce Committee, we heard from student athletes, and they resoundingly said, we don't want the employee model. We hear that on the other side, that this is where we should go. We hear from the coaches today, who are very talented. They don't want the employee model because it changes the face of a student athlete. And so, Director McIntosh, you're on the hot seat for a little bit, but I want to kind of walk through some of the implications that if Congress were to adopt what others on the other side are saying in an employee model, what does that do? Well, so first of all, if they're employees, you have an employer-employee relationship, which presumably means that they could get fired if they're injured. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And you also have additional taxes that the university would pay on their behalf, the student athlete's behalf. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Of course, they would be paying taxes now as well on any revenue that they receive, right?
I think it's actually worse than that, Congressman. I think they would be taxed on the revenue that they received and taxed on benefits that they currently receive in which they're not paying taxes on.
Right. So mental wellness coaches, tutors, room and board, food, swag that they get, these will all be taxable under existing law. Is that correct?
Potentially.
Okay. What about what happens in the event that an athlete is injured?
I think that's the problem. One of the benefits that our student athletes have right now is they have guaranteed scholarships for 4 years, even if they are injured. I live this myself as an employee in a sports organization in the NFL, as a player. I was injured in the second year of my contract, and I was terminated after the third year.
All right, so how many student athletes are at the University of Wisconsin?
Approximately 800, sir.
What's that? 800. So if you go to an employee model, you have just hired 800 additional employees of the university, correct?
Theoretically, yes.
What does that do to your budget?
It puts tremendous pressure on our budget. I'm trying to envision our HR department processing 800, posting 800 positions, posting a position for a wide receiver on our football team. It seems impractical, sir.
Right, and so, and to be fair, you might, as the University of Wisconsin, be able to absorb better than other schools, correct? So smaller schools would be really on the chopping block.
I think that is true. I think we would have a better chance. I think it would be detrimental to programs at lower levels.
So if we decided to go to an employee model, which I think is a mistake, you're now paying more money. And what happens naturally when you've got to pay more money, but there's a finite amount of money that you are budgeted every year? You have to make cuts elsewhere. Is that correct?
We would be forced to find the money through growing of revenues or cutting of expenses.
Okay, and cutting of expenses probably means cutting of sports, correct?
We would take every step necessary to avoid that. That would be the last resort.
But it is a reality that could happen.
I think that would be a reality for many programs at lower levels.
And also what happens too, this has not been discussed at all. So if you're injured as a college athlete and you're considered an employee of the university when you're injured, does that also trigger workers' compensation laws within the state?
Presumably.
What does that do to the state budgets that are impacted?
It's not good for them.
So basically all the schools, including, we did a liability safe harbor bill last year that was supported by big schools, small schools, historically black colleges, student athlete organizations and entities, because they need that oxygen in which to come up with their own framework. But if we go to this model, that's the rub, is that when somebody is injured, which injuries happen in college sports, you're now blowing wide open a state budget from a workers' compensation perspective, because student athletes do get hurt. They recover, but they do get hurt. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. I just think it's important that we remind ourselves this is not what our student athletes are asking for.
I'm going to take it just briefly, my last remaining seconds. the NCAA and other entities, and I'm not going to apologize for prior actions of the NCAA, but they can't even enforce the rules right now without being sued. And I understand that y'all are, like I say collectively, the college sports are seeking a liability safe harbor that would kind of go along with any federal legislation. How important is that liability shield to help preserve college athletics in the future?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I think it's extremely important. I think it's important to distinguish that we are not asking for a blanket antitrust exemption. We are looking for a limited safe harbor in areas in which we need to be allowed to make rules, like around eligibility, that can preserve the opportunity for future student athletes in the future. I don't think we want 12, 13-year college athletes. And those are the types of rules right now that are being determined by the courts.
So like the basketball player that just was granted his 8th year of eligibility, right? So I'm not going to call him out by name, but I mean, we're institutionalizing the Van Wilders of college sports if we go down that model.
That's the risk that's out there right now.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Without, do you have one? Yeah.